Colm, me and you were chatting about Liverpool United before last week and how bad of a derby it's become in the last couple of years. Last weekend's game, it was a pretty good game.
Yeah, well, it depends. It depends who you're talking to. I mean, do you mean good in terms of entertaining or
quality of the game?
Fans?
A little bit of bite to it in the end. The players look to be getting into it. Fans were up for it as well. Anfield was rocking.
Yeah, it was. Andy Minton wrote a piece actually for The Athletic. He was talking about what it was like being in the away end as a United fan, and how generally speaking it's much safer these days between Liverpool and Manchester and United and Liverpool fans. But you could hear it through, like watching on TV, you could definitely hear the atmosphere, but it was just so much to do with the football itself, and United somehow stayed in the game and really did not play well. And yet Liverpool won the match. As a Manchester United fan, it was. I thought it was actually quite depressing to watch the game. But it's my favourite fixture of the season, definitely. Liverpool away, Anfield. I love it because I just love winning that fixture. But I mean, I'm even at a place, this is probably beside the point, but I'm even at a place as a United fan where is the best thing to do to win, to continue this regime. So I wasn't exactly happy to see Liverpool win.
Let's not go down that rabbit hole.
But it was, it's still my favourite game. And sure, Jamie Carragher there was gloating about the viewership figures on it. It was 3.4 million they had.
It wasn't really that impressive.
Yeah, but when you compare it to, I think it was Gary Lineker co-tweeted them back and said the Spurs Middlesbrough FA Cup third round replay got 500,000 more than that. But that you're talking about terrestrial TV versus your packaged.
It makes a huge difference. The one thing I noticed from this game in particular was if you look at the bickering on Sky Sports afterwards, it was sort of split down the middle with Souness and Carragher, with Evra and Keane on one end, and it was basically two sets of United players, two sets of Liverpool players just absolutely going at each other, and you could tell that there was a little bit of bitterness between in their relationship.
Yeah, I think that exchange proved more than any other thing that I've seen how the roles have switched from the traditional, brickbats that would have been thrown at Liverpool fans for living in the past and the like. But the fact that Keane was going to the extent that he was to protect Solskjaer kind of shows that there's a little bit of a siege mentality even among people that wouldn't necessarily be predicted to do so. So, there's always a bit of theatre to it. Roy Keane's absolutely perfectly suited to that role, a little bit of a devil's advocate. But as Joe's been saying on the show the last couple of days, his mind kind of speeds up as the anger kind of courses through him, as I'm sure the lads in fairness remember from our show. But yeah, it's a sad state of affairs really at the moment.
Outside of that, basing it plainly on rivalries, because that's what we're here to talk about. Before we go into the rabbit hole talking about where United are at the minute, Roy Keane, as a player, the rivalry would have been Arsenal. So where does the Liverpool-United match compare with the Arsenal-United games of the 03-04 era?
Those Arsenal-United games were because of the quality of the teams. That wasn't so much like the club Arsenal versus the club Manchester United, whereas United-Liverpool transcends any form or talent in the squad, i.e. the game just gone from a United perspective. But those United-Arsenal games are just nostalgic for United fans now because they were so competitive, and you didn't just have the competitiveness but you had the quality as well, scattered throughout the pitch, so much so when Keane and Vieira shot that Best of Enemies documentary a few years ago and they had to pick their combined 11 between the two sides. It was genuinely really interesting to watch, to see who they'd pick and more importantly who they'd omit from the team. But now, United-Liverpool have transcended who plays. It's just the intense rivalry of it, and that's the difference for me. That's always been the difference.
Yeah, I suppose that brings us on to a little bit more of an interesting point, that there are games that are rivalries because of the quality of opposition.
Yeah,
and there's games that are rivalries because there's a deep-seated animosity between the two sets of fans. For example, we'll use another United example, the United-Leeds rivalry of the 90s. That was based on the fact that Leeds were very, very close opponents at United. It has nothing to do with where the cities are.
Well, I disagree slightly. I think there is a bit of a trans-Pennine rivalry. It's funny because if you were to look at a map of the UK at times, you're kind of like, well, why are they rivals? Particularly if, I'm sure we'll go on to Palace and Brighton as later in the show. But that one was just, there's kind of the whole Lancashire-Yorkshire thing is on top of the on top of the teams being as close as they were, and the absolute cauldron that Ellen Road used to be in those matches. Like, they were consistently my favourite matches. Like, when I was growing up, like particularly around sort of that period where Leeds had the team of, you know, Kewell and Viduka and Smith, and like around 01-02, like it was just insane. And it's funny how those things actually develop, because we were talking about Liverpool and United earlier. I was reading the Busby book recently, and obviously the links that he had with Liverpool, that has sort of developed relatively late on, like in terms of the total antipathy. Like, you can't imagine ever a player from United going to Liverpool now, or vice versa, whereas we're in a slightly different state of affairs with Leeds where they are at the moment. But that's why most Manchester United fans want them back up, and Leeds probably too.
Yeah, well, you'd be more familiar with the county element of England, so talk to us a little bit about that. Like, where does that come from? What counties would be a little bit more at each other's necks than the others?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, Yorkshire and Lancashire and Greater Manchester, I suppose, it kind of goes back to War of the Roses and all that kind of caper, but the reality is that most of it comes from economic, you know, rivalries. So even if you're looking at Liverpool versus United, it's apparently based on the proximity to the Manchester Canal. So basically it bypassed Liverpool, so all the exports were actually coming into Manchester, and they built up a cotton trade and a very booming kind of textile trade. So that's where the actual rivalries between the cities happened. And then I suspect that the ones in London, i.e. Arsenal Spurs, or even Arsenal Chelsea, Spurs Chelsea, etc., they're just strict proximity, and you know you're pretty much all on top of each other too. So
yeah, well,
the other ones are fairly. The other rivalries, like the sort of Watford Luton or something like that, they're always strike me as fairly kind of peripheral ones, but not to the fans, I'm sure.
The London ones are very much derbies because they're in the same city. Out of the London derbies, which are the best? Because I'm going to throw my hat in here, and I think that Arsenal-Tottenham for years now has been a brilliant game. The fans have been at each other, the players have been at each other. If you recall Dele Alli's goal a few years back where he slid in front of the Arsenal fans, and you see the still image, and it looks like something from the Renaissance.
Yeah.
For me, that's the best London derby. I'm not sure if you agree.
You're very much a Renaissance man, though, Enda. So
oh God, yeah, I am.
Just see what he's wearing now. Like, geez, that's amazing. Definitely Spurs Arsenal. You were saying before we started recording, Chelsea Arsenal was your favourite, was it? That you had like that buzz?
I think Arsenal Chelsea is always a brilliant game, and there's just something about watching the red and blue. It's
the actual colours.
Yeah, it's deep seated in like English culture. There's red against blue.
Yeah.
And that for me, like, I think it's always a very open game of football. It's always entertaining.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like modern derbies in England aren't really comparable with modern derbies from Europe and from South America and even from up in Scotland, because there's not it's not as intense.
It depends. But
Arsenal Tottenham always strikes me as one that's kind of kept that little bite about it.
Yeah, Arsenal Tottenham have, I guess, a mixture of what we were saying earlier about Arsenal Tottenham is always a really good game, especially the last, say, just round figure of 5 years. But I would say that's a pretty comfortable estimate, right? Yeah, that United Arsenal had that quality of rivalry, and then United Liverpool has the history, and Arsenal Spurs is a bit of both. But obviously, as a United fan, you'd be looking towards the other one. But like Arsenal Spurs is a game, as a United fan, where they would be traditionally two huge rivalries, or certainly modern terms with Spurs, that I still really enjoy watching that game, regardless of how it would impact on United. I think it's a really brilliant game of football, and you can actually hear through the TV, you can hear the crowd. You can really hear it, because sometimes you think you're like, I would say the vast majority of Premier League games that I watch, you really can't hear much from the crowd. That's not a generalisation, because actually when you're at these matches, you're like, there's actually a lot more said than you would think watching TV. Like a lot more, it's like the bitty comments and like how fans rate certain players that you were never going to hear through TV. But with that game, that's a testament for me about the quality, or that's the litmus test for a good rivalry or a good derby, is that you can hear it through your TV. And your volume could be at a moderate level, and you can still hear.
Best thing ever when a commentator has to apologise on behalf of the language.
They generally have to do that at Burnley, because the Burnley press box is right.
Yeah.
There's no protection at all. So.
No, like I agree. Arsenal, Chelsea, I think particularly going back to even the start of the 2000s, sort of 2000, 2001, etc., was such a beguiling one because it was also at that stage they were the two teams that were packed with foreign stars as well. So it really felt like the kind of coming of age of like Premier League football when I was growing up. I think maybe it's been lost a little bit over the last few years. But another one I'd throw into the mix for London is West Ham against Spurs. That one is massive, particularly for West Ham. I think West Ham fans are always looking to those fixtures throughout when the fixtures are announced. And Spurs too. Spurs love putting it over on them. I've got mates who are season ticket holders in both, and they absolutely love that. And they really are extremely nervous on the day. So.
Yeah. Well, what amazes me about London is that it's a footballing city. Like, it's absolutely engulfed in football, but you wouldn't notice that at all. If you have your Arsenals, Chelsea, Fulham, Crystal Palace. You have Crystal Palace to an extent. It's greater London more than anything. But you wouldn't actually notice that if you're in London city centre.
It's a weird one because I think that fans of those teams have been forced to coexist, right? So if you walk down Seven Sisters Road in an Arsenal shirt, like on a non-match day, you're probably not really going to get much grief. In the same way that if you're walking through Islington with Spurs, you're probably not going to get much. However, the shoe was on the other foot. Any time of the year, if you walk through Leeds City Centre wearing Man United kit or walk through Liverpool City Centre with the United kit on, you would get absolute brickbats from people. And look, it's not going to turn ugly or anything, but it's just people making comments and stuff like that. And I think that speaks to the visceral nature of the rivalries further north. But it is interesting, the London one, you can kind of it'd pass you by a little bit.
Well, Damien Delaney said one of the reasons he loved playing for Crystal Palace and living in London, and it kind of brings into a broader point of why players want to live in London, is that he was able to live a normal life without people wondering and coming up asking for pictures. He could, for example, he could get the tube home after a game, and he would be completely fine.
Yeah,
that's interesting to me that these rivalries in England don't have much of a cultural impact, especially in non-match days, which is particularly interesting to hear, because you look at, like, say, in Belgrade, Red Star versus Partizan. That's like Red Star is like the team of the people. Partizan are like state-backed, so there's always that rivalry, and they're only separated by like 400 metres the stadium, so there's a park that separates them and the fans fight there. And then you have even Ajax and Feyenoord. Ajax are seen as the liberal side, Feyenoord are a bit more industrial and right-wing. So it always fascinates me that there are, like Galatasaray and Fenerbahce, the same, middle class versus working class, and it's a cultural thing, and they meet on the football pitch to have this rivalry out, where, I don't know, I feel that in England it's not a class system so much in football.
It's almost, if you think about it, like the class system is the actual sport itself. The sport is the one that was played and watched by working classes, whereas rugby or even maybe cricket to a lesser extent is the kind of one of the more landed gentry, etc. Going back to United, Liverpool particularly, like there was I was listening to Andy Minton's podcast a little while back where they were talking about one of the stewards at Old Trafford actually is the guy who got the famous photo of the guy with the dart in the face when he was at Anfield. And it's a very iconic photo of sort of peak hooliganism and that kind of thing. But they were speaking to him about, what do you feel the rivalries are now? It's absolutely nothing like what it used to be in the past. So maybe we've kind of got to a point where the class system's been sort of overtaken by a little bit of feeling of kind of cleanliness, I suppose, with the entire situation.
Well, that comes with the Premier League as well. The fact that there's so many fans at these games that are tourists for a day or weekend trip, and that's absolutely fine. A lot of people want to come and watch the team that they've supported from outside of the country, and that's completely fair. That's what Irish people do when they go over. They're tourists as well. But back maybe just before the Premier League, or even in the early days, it was very much English people at English football matches supporting their team, and that's probably where the likes of the hardcore supporters came from. And because there's less and less of those going to the games, the technical allocations, they're all behind the goals, that maybe that's why it's kind of settled down a little bit. It
has to be. Because, like, I was hearing Liverpool, like, the hardcore Liverpool supporters at Anfield have no respect for Liverpool jerseys, like official replica jerseys. They see them, they're either tourists or children wearing them, and that's it. So you're not going to see them, they're not going to stand out as Liverpool fans, but they actually are the biggest Liverpool fans. And for me, it was interesting, like Ciaran was saying there about West Ham Spurs. Like, I wonder, and this is a question and not a point, but a question, is that with each team moving into this new fancy modernised stadium, does that impact the rivalry? Does that attract more tourists to the games, to the Olympic Stadium, to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium? Or will there always be that hardcore support, but they're either littered throughout the stadium, or they watch it from a different location?
Yeah, I think the new stadium's probably copper fastened what's there pretty much already. As in, I don't think that they, like, say, Everton moving from Goodison to Bramley Park is going to just completely change the fan base. I think that's probably happened gradually over the course of a period of time anyway. I think, look, we've just kind of moved into a new era, and it's probably a new era that we're all pretty happy with, because we don't really want to go to games where you're getting a dart in the fucking eye or whatever. So it's really important that you're able to be able to take children and actually kind of make that generational, these are our rivals, but also, you don't have to be shouting abuse, screaming abuse at individual, or singing about horrible events.
This is the compromise that the world of football has made in the last 15 years, is that, or even, we'll say 20 years, is that the football now is just objectively better than it was 20 years ago. Like, I always use the example, or I have done for the last year anyway, is I watched back the Champions League final from '99, the famous Solskjaer game for the treble. And this is Manchester United and Bayern Munich, the two best teams in Europe at the time. And when you compare the style of football in that game and the standard of football to a modern day Premier League, I'd say mid-table up Premier League game. Mm-hmm. The technique, like, there was only a couple of players on each side that night from Bayern and from Man United who could, like, you could put them into a modern day game and they'd fit in quite well. Like, David Beckham had a great game that night, but I remember there was so many others. There was just pot shots from a distance that were so amateur looking in comparison. But I suppose back then there was more tribalism, maybe it was a bit more exciting, there was more to it, and it was more accessible for people. And now it's become an unstoppable product.
Well, that accessibility is a massive thing, because if you look at the ticket prices for a club like Arsenal, they're massive. They're way above the line of affordability for most people who would be previous fans of Arsenal. And even if you look at the rest of the ticket prices in the Premier League, completely, vastly engulfs what you pay for in the likes of Germany.
It's insane.
Where it's still, and Germany has kept that fan culture that England seems to have lost.
Yeah, Borussia Dortmund is the club, isn't it, that everyone aspires to be in that sense, with the relatively affordable.
They have the 50 plus 1 or whatever it is, that ownership model. I'm not sure how far across that goes in the Bundesliga in terms of fan ownership, so that probably certainly helps. But just on the point of ticketing, also the timing of these games as well. Like, they've been moved endlessly for foreign audiences, which is a nature of the sport as we are, but it's probably impacted on the rivalries themselves.
Well, that, and the fact that, without putting all of the blame on the British government, they have stamped out any tiny detail that could lead to hooliganism in football. They have done their best to stamp that out. For example, in Scotland, the Old Firm game can never be played later than 12 o'clock, because if you leave it longer than 12 o'clock, the idea, at least, is that fans will go to the pub and get absolutely messed up, and then that'll cause. But for me, the idea of that is completely classist. That football fans, if you leave them off their own means, that they'll do damage.
But why did Liverpool United kick off at 4:30 on Sunday? That's the latest kick-off I can ever remember of a weekend tie between those two clubs.
I actually had to double check it, because we were doing the commentary and I was like, that can't be on that late.
4:30. Presumably that was Sky Sports thinking this is going to be our best chance of figures, and they were correct. But if that's probably the most, what you would say, aggressive rivalry in English football.
Yeah,
that'd be fair. And that was
off the big teams,
a rivalry, a genuine rivalry that still exists to this day.
Of the teams that meet regularly, because like a Millwall, West Ham, or something like that would be.
That's
well. On that, there was a study done recently. I'm not sure how scientific this is at all. I just looked it up, and they did a ranking of the 30 biggest rivalries in England based on how much the fans dislike each other. So I'm not sure how they did this, but Arsenal, Tottenham is third on that list. Manchester United versus Liverpool is fourth, coming behind Exeter, Plymouth Argyle.
All right.
Never been to that game, never seen that game, but apparently they hate each other. And Portsmouth, Southampton.
Oh yeah, that's a big.
Is number one. It's number one on that list.
Portsmouth manager the second time around. But proximity doesn't necessarily mean huge rivalry, because isn't this Nottingham Forest and Notts County have quite a decent relationship? And didn't Forest help out Notts County when they were in financial trouble and nearly ruined a couple of years ago? Whereas Forest and Derby hate each other.
Sure. Yeah.
So its proximity is not necessarily the reason.
Exactly. No, Forest Derby is the one. I presume it had predated Clough anyway, but obviously Clough come in and moving between the clubs. But again, like the proximity, it's still pretty close. It's only sort of half hour down the road, and they would play each other regularly enough. In a way, like familiarity breeds contempt. Like if you play someone regularly enough, even Liverpool Chelsea is a perfect example. I was living in Liverpool when that started kicking off. I moved there in 2004.
Yeah,
and then you saw it develop, and I always felt it was a little bit pallid. Like it wasn't really. It was just
because they played each other all the time.
They were playing each other every 2 weeks.
It's like Ireland-Denmark is the international rivalry,
international
derby.
Well, if you look at like some of the proximity clubs, you're looking at Aston Villa and Birmingham. They're sharing a city. Newcastle, Sunderland, just split up by a river. Essentially, that's how you decide who you're supporting.
Yeah.
And that for me is a massive rivalry. Sunderland, Newcastle.
Yeah, it is. So it's funny because I think Newcastle, Sunderland, and to an extent, in a different way, someone like Portsmouth, Southampton strike me as quite similar insofar as, while they're quite big cities, they are quite poor cities as well. So, like a lot of the time, rivalries come from fan culture, and I'm certainly not making a point about class per se, but a lot of young men look forward to these games as like an outlet of sort, and like we've all been at matches where you look around, you're like, the hell's wrong with you, mate? Like, just relax, or whatever, just chucking stuff or going crazy. And I think Newcastle Sunderland's one of those ones where it's just like it's chaos. Like you're always guaranteed a red card. The action on the pitch is mirrored by what's in the stands, and I really enjoy Newcastle Sunderland.
It's funny that players and then kind of casual fans are so accepting of the viciousness of certain rivalries and like the importance of them without really questioning it. Like you often hear of players coming to the Premier League for the first time and playing for, say, we'll keep in North London and say Arsenal, our Spurs, and the week or the couple of weeks prior to that derby, they're reminded constantly by the long-term players there that whatever you do, you have to win this game. You have to beat Spurs and or Arsenal, whoever you're on, whichever side you're on. And I think even Ian Wright was talking about that when he joined Arsenal from Crystal Palace in the 90s, and he said like all that he heard when he first joined was from the likes of Tony Adams and Lee Dixon and Nigel Winterburn, Paul Merson, that whatever you do, like you could score 30 goals a season here, but if you don't do it against Spurs, there's always going to be a question mark over you. And Ian Wright just accepted that, and he would be one of the more outspoken characters. And it's funny that it's a human nature thing where there's no one steps back and think, why do we hate each other so much here? And everyone just goes along with it. And that's exactly the same for fans. So there's immediately a different atmosphere in the stadium when you're at these games. And it's one of the few games of the season where it doesn't really matter about the quality of play so much. You just have to win the match.
Yeah, it's just...
And it's the casual viewer then who's affected by, you're like, the game's so great. But then if you do enjoy the hostility. You still enjoy, because it is theatre at the end of the day. It's just entertainment. But I just find it really interesting that once upon a time this massive rivalry was created, and now that's the way it is. And if that rivalry dissipates in any way, that's a bad thing to happen. It's funny. That's funny to me.
Yeah.
Outside of England, what's our favourite rivalries?
Well, if you want to stay in the UK, it's still Celtic Rangers. Because that's just pure emotion and
let's strip everything away. You've engineered this entire podcast so that we can talk about this. So
have you been to an Old Firm?
Never been to an Old Firm.
No.
It's one of the things that I really want to get to.
Yeah.
In the past, it was probably easier to do it. I probably missed my chance to do it when it was probably at its least angry. And
when was it at least angry?
Probably about 3 years ago, when Rangers were still very much in the ether, very much in the mirrors of Celtic in the second division, and they were coming up, and Celtic fans just had no respect for Rangers at that point. But it's amazing to me that rivalry has survived this long and still kept its anger and hostility.
Well, that's what I mean. Like no one questions it; they just go along with it. But like that's nothing to do. Like that game has nothing to do with football. Out of all these rivalries,
not anymore.
Yeah. I absolutely love the Old Firm games, and I love the idea of the Old Firm and all this kind of game. But I think we have to be really careful of inheriting other people's beefs. I think that's actually a big problem in fan culture in general. Like when you're talking about United, Liverpool, and throwing slurs at people. That, I just think it's really, really kind of tame. But sorry, just on I watched the first Southampton I've seen in ages, just over Christmas, and my God, the rivalry is back and is banging now because there was 2-1.
Yeah, well, it's
hurting.
Well, it's massive for Scottish football, and it's very important for Scottish football that this stays as strong as it is, because it brings in the casual viewers, and casual viewers bring in money. But on the inheriting other people's beef, there was a piece done with a fan, Rangers fan, who moved to Scotland, moved to Glasgow, and he was from, I think it was India or Pakistan, and he got involved in it, and he's now banned from Old Firm games because he got he was going so far with his chants that he was getting kicked out, and he didn't know what the chants meant. Like the history of the chants, he obviously knew what they meant, but he saw it as football banter. He didn't see it as sectarian chants. He didn't he was singing the Billy Boys. He was singing songs about Fenians. All this here, aiming them towards Celtic fans, and he just saw it as banter.
Yeah, but he just wanted to assimilate. That's all. He just wanted to assimilate.
He just wanted to be part of.
He just wanted to be part of something. Yeah, nothing to do with football. Like you were saying, it's good for Scottish football, Celtic and Rangers, but it doesn't exist in its own island for me. That rivalry, it's just its own thing. Like it happens to be in the Scottish Premiership.
Yeah, it's a closer thing to, say, the River Plate Boca rivalry.
Yeah. But they'll say that's much more extreme. Like if you ever hear Maradona talk about it, but there was a video online a few months ago of a fan who he didn't support either Celtic or Rangers, but he went to both Ibrox and Parkhead to do a tour wearing the other team's jersey.
I thought that was idiotic.
Go on, why?
You're stoking something there. He was looking for...
He's wearing a shirt. Like.
He was going out looking for...
But he wanted to see what the reaction would be.
He did, but we mentioned about wearing a shirt in different parts of the city. When as a Celtic fan growing up, when we were going to Celtic matches from Donegal, we had to go through the north to get to the ferry, and we were advised not to wear any Celtic gear going through the north in case it stoked up anger. Like, if you're doing that, you're looking for a reaction. You're looking to stoke up that anger. And for me, that was an idiotic thing to do. It's further adding to that anger and animosity towards the fans.
Do you think that anger just from basically a piece of clothing that someone's wearing is stupid, would you say?
I think it's idiotic.
Yeah.
But you have to be aware that exists.
It exists, yeah.
That attitude
do you agree
exist.
with it, though?
I don't agree with the attitude.
What's your opinion? What if you saw someone wearing a Rangers jersey? What are your first thoughts? You don't care?
It's a shirt. I wore a Northern Ireland t-shirt in here. Ireland were playing Northern Ireland in a friendly, and because people make jokes about my accents, I decided I'd wear a Northern Ireland jersey and to see what reaction I got, and people were unhappy. It's a piece of cloth with a crest on it.
There was a former Republic of Ireland midfielder who had
he was not happy with it, and I know that sometimes those jerseys can represent something else to other people. And that's fair enough. That's our view. But I think that you should be able to wear whatever you want without.
But that's where we are going that way in society. I think the younger generation is definitely they're becoming much less partisan in that way, and it's a more connected world. Like, this is a much bigger conversation, but basically the world is much more, or is the most connected it's been. And therefore, they're seeing it's frivolous now. Which I suppose, if you describe that rivalry as frivolous, then you are definitely antagonising the people who care about it. So I'm not saying that either.
I don't blame the person who told you to not wear Celtic tops. I completely understand that. But what it comes down to for me is personal responsibility. Because if there's a difference between you driving through an estate that might be anti-Celtic in some respect, and flicking the V's at everyone going around with your Celtic tops and doing that. However, if you're literally just wearing a shirt, the responsibility is completely on the other individuals to keep themselves in the decent society that we tend to live in.
I agree, but what I'm trying to get a point across is that he's going through Republican areas of Glasgow wearing a Rangers top. He's going through loyalist areas of Glasgow wearing a Celtic top, knowing full well that that's going to cause an uproar if he walks amongst the wrong set of fans. And yes, I agree with what you're saying, that the onus is not on him for being attacked, it's on the attackers that attack him. But if he were to be had things thrown at him or even jumped or anything, the worst of the worst could have happened. He's putting a black mark on on one set of fans when really he should have had more sense than to walk down.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't think anyone really enjoys this, in particular when it's done for, you know, social media clicks and views and stuff like that. I don't really feel that's useful. But, yeah, and the weird thing would have been had he just decided to keep going until something happened, because he had an end goal in mind. Yeah, well,
like Andy Gorham was at Manchester United for 2 months in 2001, and himself and Roy Keane didn't speak a word because Gorham's a Rangers legend and Roy's a massive Celtic fan. And I heard Roy speak a few years ago, and he was asked the day he left Man United, and he said, like, you know, he cried in the car the day he left Man United, and as he was driving away, you know, he was thinking, what am I going to do next? And in hindsight, he was saying, like, he should have just packed it in then, because he said the only reason I signed for Celtic was because I fancied a game against Rangers.
Yeah, well, that's it. Like, you want to play in the biggest games, and we have a couple of big ones coming up in the next few weeks.
Go on.
We have Chelsea Arsenal, that's tonight as we're recording it.
Yeah.
Tottenham Man City 1st of February, and Chelsea versus Man United on the 17th of February after the winter break. Hopefully there's going to be another couple.
Out there. That's not a rivalry. That's insane.
Tottenham
City.
Did you say Tottenham City?
Tottenham City.
They're just competing.
Yeah, they're competitors more than it's a rivalry.
That's fair enough.
But at the if we're not specifically talking about derbies, it's just rivalries.
So before we wrap this up, then we're all in agreement that Celtic Rangers is the best.
Absolutely, unequivocally so. And I'm actually not even joking. It's amazing.
I know that. I mean, when you mentioned this segment to me or this show, that's the first thing that came into my mind was Celtic Rangers. But then, like, the most enjoyable rivalry for me is Barcelona Real Madrid. But that's always to do with football. And the game for me was like November 2010 when Barcelona beat Real Madrid 5-0 when Mourinho was Madrid manager. That was that was one of the most complete performances I've ever seen anywhere. And so that for me is a great rivalry. But like Celtic Rangers is just vitriolic, and it kind of exists in its own island, I think, in every way these days, because I don't think there's rivalries like that.
Yeah. All right, Colm Boohig, Ciaran Bradley, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
We'll take a quick break.